In her hands was a letter that should have saved him, but instead became his last testament. What the censors tried to hide for 79 years, we'll read together now. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Martha Henderson held it up to the kitchen light, trying to see through the thin V-mail paper, through the purple censorship stamps that bled across its surface like bruises. March 1944, Topeka, Kansas. Her son Tommy's handwriting, smaller than usual, cramped together as if trying to say everything the censors wouldn't allow. She didn't open it immediately. 3 months had passed since his last letter. 3 months of checking that window every morning, of jumping at every ring of the telephone, of scanning the newspapers for any mention of the 82nd Airborne Division. The coffee had gone cold in her cup, but she didn't notice. Outside, spring was trying to break through the last grip of winter, crocuses pushing through patches of melting snow. Inside her small kitchen, time had stopped. The letter she would write back to him that afternoon would be discovered 79 years later, tucked inside the binding of a family Bible, along with Tommy's final reply. Neither letter had ever been sent through official military channels. They had traveled by different routes, carried by different hands, arriving too late to comfort, too late to warn, but not too late to remember. Martha finally opened the envelope with her mother's silver letter opener, the one that had opened letters from her own brother in the trenches of France, 26 years before. Tommy's handwriting spilled across the page, neat at first, then increasingly hurried, as if he knew his time was running out. "Dearest Mother," he began. "I'm writing this by candlelight in what used to be someone's wine cellar. The owner left a few bottles behind, and Kowalski says we should save them for victory, but I think victory might be saving them for us, if you know what I mean. Don't worry about the sounds you might imagine as you read this. It's just thunder. Always thunder here, even when the sky is clear." Martha knew it wasn't thunder. She had learned to read between the lines of censored letters, to decode the language her son had developed to tell her what he couldn't say directly. Thunder meant artillery. Clear skies meant air raids. And wine cellars meant they were hiding underground, waiting for something terrible to begin or something terrible to end. She spread out her good stationery, the kind she had been saving since before the war, when paper wasn't rationed and you could write as many pages as your heart demanded. The fountain pen had been Tommy's high school graduation gift to her, bought with money he had earned working summers at the hardware store. "So you can write to me when I'm famous," he had joked. Neither of them had imagined she would be writing to him in a war zone, measuring each word against the weight of what couldn't be said. "My dearest Tommy," Martha wrote, her script careful and clear, knowing that tired eyes would need to read it by whatever light could be found. "Spring is coming to Kansas, though it's fighting winter every step of the way." She paused, dipping the pen again, watching the ink pool at the tip. "How do you tell your son that his younger sister had started wearing his Letterman jacket to school? Not because it was cold, but because it still smelled like him. How do you explain that his father had started sleeping in his study, surrounded by maps of Europe marked with red pins, trying to guess where the 82nd might be? How do you write that the telegrams had started arriving on their street, that Mrs. Kowalski 3 houses down had collapsed on her porch when the Western Union boy appeared, that the whole neighborhood had heard her screaming her son's name?" Tommy's letter continued with forced cheerfulness about the French countryside, about learning useful phrases like "more wine please" and "where is the nearest shelter," about how Private Johnson from Alabama had taught them all to play harmonicas to pass the time. But Martha could see the spaces between the words, the things crossed out by censors or by Tommy himself. There was a water stain on one corner that might have been rain, or might have been something else. "The French people have been kind to us," Tommy wrote. "Yesterday, an old woman gave me a piece of bread that I know she couldn't spare. Her hands shook as she handed it to me, and I saw that she was missing her wedding ring, probably sold it for food, but she still gave me bread. I tried to refuse, but she said something in French that I didn't understand, except for one word, Phil's son. She was giving bread to someone else's son because she couldn't give it to her own. Remember when you were 7, Martha wrote, and you decided to dig a tunnel from our backyard to China? You were so certain that, if you just kept digging, you'd come out the other side of the world. Your father didn't have the heart to tell you about the molten core, so he just bought you a better shovel. You dug for 3 days straight until you hit the water line and flooded Mrs. Murphy's petunias. I think about that sometimes, about your determination to get to the other side of something, no matter what stood in your way. She had to stop writing for a moment. Her hand was cramping, but that wasn't why. Through the kitchen window, she could see the telegraph boy turning onto Maple Street, his bicycle wobbling under the weight of his leather bag. He was just delivering telegrams, she told herself. Regular telegrams. People still sent birthday wishes by telegram. Business correspondence. Birth announcements. Not every telegram began with, "We regret to inform you." The boy passed their house without stopping, and Martha released a breath she didn't know she had been holding. Somewhere down the street, another mother was holding her breath now. The arithmetic of war was simple and cruel. Every boy who came home was a boy who didn't come home to someone else. Every letter received was a letter someone else would never get. Tommy's letter took a darker turn on the second page. The handwriting was different here, tighter, more controlled. "Mother, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not worry about it, which I know is like asking you not to breathe. But please try. We're moving soon. Can't say where, obviously, but it's important. Historical, even. The kind of thing they'll write books about, assuming anyone's left to write books. I wanted you to know that I'm ready. All those Sunday school lessons about David and Goliath, about doing what's right even when you're scared, they stuck. I'm scared, Mother. I won't pretend I'm not. But I'm ready too." Martha had to read that paragraph 3 times before she could continue. Tommy had never admitted to being scared before. In all his letters, through basic training and his first months overseas, he had maintained a shell of bravado that she had seen through but appreciated nonetheless. This admission felt like a crack in armor she hadn't realized he was wearing. "I've been thinking about fear lately," she wrote. "Not the big fears, the ones they write newspaper articles about, but the small ones. The fear that the milk will spoil before we can use it all. The fear that your father's cough is more than just a cold. The fear that I'll forget the exact sound of your laugh. These little fears pile up like snow, don't they? Layer after layer until you can't see the ground anymore. But spring always comes. The snow always melts. And underneath, things are still growing, still reaching for the sun." She wanted to tell him about the nightmares, about waking up at 3 a.m. certain she had heard his voice calling from the backyard, only to find it was the wind in the elm trees. She wanted to tell him about the map of France she had hidden in her sewing basket, marked with possible routes of advancement, possible battlegrounds, possible places where American boys were learning what their grandfathers had learned in the same fields, the same forests, the same mud. Tommy's letter contained a passage that had been heavily censored, black bars crossing out entire sentences. But the censors had missed something, or perhaps they hadn't understood it. "Remember our code from when I was little?" Tommy had written. "When we played spies in the backyard." First letter of each sentence still works. Martha found a pencil and began working through the censored section that followed. "Italy was beautiful this time of year. Many of the men are talking about coming back after the war, sending postcards from Rome, crossing the Tiber like Caesar, and seeing the Vatican. Reading about history is one thing. Entering it is another. Determining our own fate now." She wrote down the first letters. I, M, S, C, A, R, E, D. Her hand shook as she returned to her own letter. How do you respond to your son's hidden confession? How do you tell him it's okay to be scared when you're terrified yourself? How do you give strength when you feel like you're made of tissue paper, likely to tear at the slightest touch? "Your father and I were talking last night," she wrote, though in truth, they had barely spoken in days, each afraid that words would make their fears real. "We were remembering your first day of school. You were so brave, marching up those steps with your lunch pail and your new shoes. It wasn't until you got home that you admitted you had been scared all day, that you had hidden in the bathroom during recess because the playground seemed too big. But you went back the next day, and the next, and soon you owned that playground, organizing games and making friends and becoming exactly who you were meant to be." The afternoon sun was slanting through the kitchen window now, casting long shadows across her letter. Outside, she could hear the neighbor children playing war, arguing about who had to be the Germans, their voices high and careless in the way that only children's voices could be during wartime. They didn't understand that their games were other children's reality, that somewhere across the ocean, boys not much older than them were playing a game where nobody got to go home when their mothers called for dinner. Tommy's letter revealed more as it continued. He wrote about a French family who had hidden them for a night, sharing bread that they couldn't spare and wine they had buried in their garden. He wrote about a German prisoner who had shown him a photograph of his children, 2 girls in matching dresses standing in front of a house that might or might not still exist. He wrote about the chaplain who had stopped believing in God but continued conducting services because the men needed to believe in something. "We're all actors here," Tommy wrote, "playing roles we never auditioned for. The brave soldier, the confident officer, the cheerful correspondent writing home. But sometimes, late at night when the artillery is quiet and you can hear the rats in the walls, the masks slip. We become who we really are. Scared boys who want to go home, who dream about ice cream and baseball and sleeping without our boots on, who write letters to our mothers and try not to say goodbye." Martha had to stop reading. Try not to say goodbye. The words sat on the page like a prophecy, heavy with meaning she didn't want to acknowledge. She returned to her own letter, determined to give him something to hold on to, something more than fear and distance and the weight of unspoken truths. "Do you remember the story I used to tell you about the warrior and the lighthouse?" she wrote. "How the warrior was lost at sea, and the only thing that guided him home was a light that someone kept burning, night after night, even when everyone said he would never return. I never told you the ending of that story, did I? The warrior did make it home, but he was changed. The sea had marked him inside and out, but the person keeping the light burning was changed too. They had learned that love isn't just a feeling, it's an action. It's keeping the light burning even when the oil runs low. It's watching the horizon even when your eyes are tired. It's believing in someone's return even when the world tells you to give up." She wanted to tell him that she had become the lighthouse keeper, that his father had installed a new porch light that they never turned off, that his sister did her homework by the front window where she could watch the street, that they were all waiting, all watching, all keeping their lights burning for him. At the very bottom of Tommy's page, in pencil so faint she could barely see it, he had written, "D-Day -60. The words meant nothing to her then. D-Day was just another military term like H-hour or 0 hour, abstractions that meant something to generals and nothing to mothers. She wouldn't know until later that Tommy had given her a clue, a timestamp on his fate. 60 days before the invasion of Normandy. 60 days before the world changed. 60 days before his unit would be among the first to jump into occupied France, scattered like seeds in a hostile garden. Martha sealed her letter and set it aside to mail in the morning. But something made her hesitate. Some instinct, maternal or mystical, made her open the envelope again and add one more line. "P.S. Whatever thunder you're hearing, whatever storm you're weathering, remember that storms pass but mountains remain. Be a mountain, my love. Be a mountain." She wouldn't know until the letter was found decades later that these would be the last words Tommy would read from her, carried in his breast pocket as he boarded the plane for Normandy, found on his body by a medic who had the humanity to send it home, outside of official channels. One mother's words returning to another mother's hands, a circle of love closed by loss but never broken. If you believe these voices deserve to be heard, don't let them disappear again. Subscribe now. 3 weeks later, the second letter arrived, though arrived wasn't quite the right word. It was delivered by a young man in civilian clothes who wouldn't give his name, who simply handed Martha an envelope and said, "From Tommy, ma'am. He wanted to make sure you got this, no matter what." Martha's hands shook as she took the envelope. It was thicker than military mail, unsealed and censored. The paper inside was different, too rough, almost handmade, like something torn from a journal or ledger. Tommy's handwriting was barely recognizable, rushed and slanted, as if written in darkness or haste or fear. "Mother," it began, without his usual dearest or any other pleasantry. "I'm writing this in a church somewhere in France. Can't tell you where exactly. Not because of censors, but because I honestly don't know. We've been moving at night, sleeping in barns and basements, eating when we can, fighting when we must. The man who will carry this letter to you is Father Francois. He's promised to find a way, though I don't know how anyone finds ways anymore in this chaos. Martha sat down slowly at the kitchen table, the same table where she had written her last letter to him. Outside, life continued its wartime normal, children walking to school, women heading to factory jobs, old men tending victory gardens. But inside her kitchen, time had stopped again, suspended between one heartbeat and the next. I got your letter yesterday, Tommy continued. The one about being a mountain. I've read it 17 times. I counted. Each time I find something new, some word or phrase that I hadn't really seen before. It's like you knew I would need to parse it out slowly, to ration it like we ration everything else here. Your words have become my food, Mother. More sustaining than the K-rations, more warming than the wool blankets that never quite dry out. The handwriting grew more erratic as the letter continued. Martha could see places where the pen had torn through the paper, where words had been started and abandoned, where drops of something, water, wine, tears, had made the ink run. I need to tell you the truth now, Mother. The whole truth. Not the sanitized version that gets through the censors. Not the brave face I've been wearing in my letters. I need someone to know what really happened here, what's really happening, in case the official version is all that survives. Father Francois says confession is good for the soul, but I'm not Catholic, and I'm not sure I have a soul anymore anyway. What I have is a story, and you're the only person I trust to hold it. Martha found herself holding her breath as she read, as if exhaling might disturb the words on the page, might make them disappear or change into something else, something bearable. We jumped on June 6th, just after midnight. D-Day, they're calling it now, though when you're falling through darkness with flak exploding around you and tracers lighting up the sky like deadly fireworks, it doesn't feel like something that will end up in history books. It feels like the end of the world, or at least the end of your world. I landed in a flooded field, up to my chest in water, my chute dragging me backwards. Lost most of my equipment cutting myself free. Found 3 other men from my unit hiding in a drainage ditch. Just 3, Mother, out of a whole plane full of boys from places like Kansas and Ohio and Georgia. The rest were scattered across Normandy like dandelion seeds. Some landing in trees, some in German positions, some in rivers where the weight of their gear pulled them under before they could cut free. These testimonies haven't been heard for 80 years. Your support allows these truths to continue reaching people. Martha had to stop reading. She walked to the window, looking out at the same street where Tommy had learned to ride a bicycle, where he had played stickball, where he had walked Julie to school every morning even though it made him late for his own classes. How did you reconcile that boy with the one writing about death falling from the sky? She returned to the letter, to Tommy's increasingly desperate handwriting. The letter continued with details that no mother should have to read, that no son should have to write. Tommy described the smell of burned flesh, the sound of men crying in the darkness, the weight of a dead friend's dog tags in his pocket. He wrote about executing a German soldier who couldn't have been more than 16, about finding French civilians hung from trees with signs around their necks warning against helping the Americans, about a medic who went insane and started laughing at wounds, giggling at gore until someone sedated him and sent him away. But here's the thing, Mother, Tommy wrote, his handwriting suddenly steadier, more controlled. In between all this horror, there are moments of such beauty that I don't have words for them. A French girl, maybe 7 years old, running out of a ruined house to give us flowers. An old man sharing his last bottle of wine with soldiers who didn't speak his language. A German prisoner showing me how to treat a wound using local herbs his grandmother had taught him about. These moments feel like grace, like God reaching down through all this madness to remind us that we're still human. Martha realized she was crying only when tears dropped onto the page, blurring a word here and there. She wiped them away carefully, not wanting to damage Tommy's writing. These last words he was sending her from a world away. I met a man yesterday, the letter continued. Another American soldier, though from a different unit. He was dying, Mother. We both knew it. Stomach wound that had gone bad, infection setting in. The morphine had run out, so all I could do was sit with him. He asked me to write to his mother, and I promised I would, but he died before he could tell me her address. He just kept saying, tell her I wasn't alone. Tell her someone was with me. So I'm telling you, in case I'm the one dying tomorrow, in case someone else is making promises they can't keep. I won't be alone, Mother. None of us are alone here. We're all each other's sons and brothers and fathers. We're all each other's witnesses. The letter shifted then, became more focused, more urgent. I'm going to tell you something now that I'm not supposed to know, that none of us are supposed to know, but Father Francois told me because he thinks someone should document it, someone should remember. There's a camp about 50 kilometers from here. Not a military camp. Something else. The resistance fighters who come through the church whisper about it. Train cars going in full, coming out empty. Smoke that smells wrong. Children's shoes piled higher than houses. I don't understand it, Mother. I don't understand how this is possible. We came here to fight soldiers, but this is something else. This is evil in a way that makes our battlefield look clean. Martha had to put the letter down. She walked to the sink, ran cold water over her wrists, tried to breathe normally. The world Tommy was describing wasn't the world she knew. Wasn't the world anyone should know. But she forced herself to return to his words, to bear witness to his witness. I've been thinking about your lighthouse story, Tommy wrote, about the warrior who came home changed. I understand now that the story wasn't really about him, was it? It was about the keeper of the light, the one who had to love someone who had become a stranger to themselves. I'm changing, Mother. I can feel it happening, like watching yourself from outside your own body. The Tommy who collected stamps and sang in the church choir, he's still here somewhere. But he's buried under layers of mud and blood and things that don't have names. I'm afraid that by the time I come home, if I come home, you won't recognize me. I'm afraid I won't recognize myself. But then, in the next paragraph, something shifted. The handwriting became clearer, more deliberate, as if Tommy had found some reserve of strength or clarity. But here's what I've learned, Mother. Here in this place where learning costs everything. Love is stronger than war. I know that sounds like something from a greeting card, but it's not. It's the deepest truth I know. Every act of kindness here, every moment of compassion, every time someone shares their last cigarette or gives up their dry spot in a foxhole, that's love winning. Not the war, not the killing, not the grand strategies of generals. Just people choosing to be human when everything is pushing them to be animals. The letter was nearing its end. Martha could tell because the handwriting was getting rushed again, as if Tommy was running out of time or light or courage to continue. I have to go soon. Father Francois says the route to the coast is only safe for another few hours, and after that, who knows when another chance will come. But I need you to know something, need you to carry this for me. I'm not brave, Mother. I'm terrified every second of every day. But I do what needs to be done anyway, not because I'm a hero but because you taught me that doing the right thing isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway. Remember when I was 8 and refused to go to the dentist? You sat me down and said, Tommy, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's fear that has said its prayers. I've been saying my prayers, Mother. Not the formal kind, not really. But every time I help a wounded man, every time I share my food, every time I choose mercy over revenge, that's a prayer. Every letter I write to you is a prayer. Every sunrise I live to see is a prayer. The last page of the letter was different. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if Tommy had taken special care with these final words. Mother, this may be the last letter I can send you. We're moving towards something big, something final. I can feel it the way you can feel a storm coming, that pressure in the air, that electric tension. Some of us won't make it through what's coming. Maybe none of us will. But I need you to know that I'm at peace with that. Not because I want to die, God. I want to live, I want to come home. I want to eat your overcooked pot roast and complain about it and then ask for seconds. But because I finally understand what we're fighting for. We're not fighting for countries or flags or political ideas. We're fighting for the right of that 7-year-old French girl to give flowers to strangers. We're fighting for the old man and his wine. We're fighting for all the mothers waiting at windows, all the fathers studying maps, all the sisters wearing their brothers' jackets. We're fighting for the idea that love is stronger than hate, that kindness can survive cruelty, that somewhere on the other side of this darkness, there's still light. I want you to know that you were my light, Mother. You and Dad and Julie. Every time I was scared, I thought of Sunday dinners. Every time I was hungry, I remembered the smell of your kitchen. Every time I wanted to give up, I heard your voice telling me to be a mountain. I may not make it home, but parts of me are already there. The best parts, the parts you gave me, they're safe with you. If this is goodbye, know that it's not an ending. It's a pause in a conversation that started the day I was born and will continue long after both of us are gone. Every time you tell someone about me, every time you remember something I said or did, every time you choose kindness because that's what you taught me to do, our conversation continues. All my love, all my gratitude, all my hope, your son, Tommy. P.S. Tell Julie she can have my baseball cards, but only if she promises to learn the player statistics. Tell Dad his victory garden is the best metaphor for hope I know. And tell yourself every morning that you were the best mother a son could have. Not were, or present tense. Always. Martha finished reading as the sun set, casting the kitchen in golden light that seemed too beautiful for the world the letter described. She sat in silence for a long moment, holding Tommy's words, feeling their weight. The doorbell rang. She knew before she answered it. Knew from the way the bell seemed to echo, from the way time slowed down as she walked to the door, from the way her body felt suddenly heavy, as if gravity had doubled. The telegram was brief, official, sanitized. We regret to inform you that Private Thomas Henderson was killed in action on June 28, 1944, in the service of his country. He will be awarded the Bronze Star posthumously for exceptional bravery under fire. But Martha barely read it. She was thinking about Tommy's letter, about his words still warm in her hands, about how he had found a way to tell her goodbye without saying the word, to give her comfort even as he faced his own ending, to be her lighthouse even from the darkness of war. Later, much later, after the funeral with the folded flag and the 21-gun salute, after the condolence letters and the casseroles and the awful arithmetic of grief, Martha would learn more about Tommy's last day. Father Francois would eventually make it to America, would find her, would tell her about the church that had become a field hospital, about Tommy staying behind to hold the German forces while wounded were evacuated, about how he had fought for 6 hours, alone at the end, singing hymns between rifle shots. He saved 43 lives. Father Francois would tell her, 43 men who went home to their mothers because your son stood his ground. He was a mountain, madam, immovable, unbreakable, a mountain, but that would come later. Now, in this moment, Martha stood in her doorway holding 2 pieces of paper, the telegram that told her Tommy was dead, and the letter that proved he would live forever. The sun had set completely, and the first stars were appearing, distant lights in an infinite darkness. She walked back to the kitchen table, to the place where she had written her letters to him, where she had read his letters to her, where their conversation had continued despite ocean and war and censorship. She lit a candle, just as she had every night since he left, just as she would every night until her own ending. The candle flame flickered but didn't go out. It cast shadows on the wall that looked like reaching hands, like prayers made visible, like hope refusing to be extinguished even in the darkest of nights. Martha picked up her pen one more time, not to write a letter. There was no one to send it to now, but to record, to witness, to ensure that these words wouldn't be lost. My son died a mountain, she wrote, but first he lived as my light. These are the letters they tried to hide for 79 years. These are the words that refused to die. If you believe they should continue to be heard, subscribe so these forbidden stories don't vanish again.